A lot of people have questions regarding knowledge. Okay, so let's go on with that. And where do we start here? Well, we start with a person who essentially criticized the notion that knowledge is something that you have to prove to someone else. Okay, because knowledge essentially by the Greeks was defined as belief. No difference between knowledge and belief. If anything, knowledge is deeper belief. You believe more strongly when you have knowledge than when you just believe. That's more or less it. But it all goes down to you. Knowledge is something you have yourself because belief is what you have yourself. And there are different degrees, and we say that 100% belief is knowledge, more or less. That's the notion. And but I'm saying that knowledge is something that you must prove to someone else. Um, that's the only way that we can really use that in a way that we've been using it all these years. You know, how do you prove knowledge in college? Well, you go up there and you try to persuade the teachers that you know. That means you're going to try to convince them that you know of your beliefs. Okay, that you know what you studied, or you think you know at least. Okay, so this fellow says, no, you don't prove knowledge to someone else. So he says the following, he says, knowledge needn't include proving something to others. Uh-huh. Knowledge exists as soon as it is discovered, not as soon as it is proven to enough people. I see. Well, let's first put my definition so that you can see why where he comes with all this, with his version, his rejoinder essentially. Okay, and this is it. Despite deriving from the word knowledge, science has nothing to do with knowledge. Okay, so the word "seed," that's where science comes from, has to do with the word know or knowledge, and that's where the word science comes from. That's the etymology, but we don't care. Our forefathers screwed it up from the start when they identified science with knowledge. Okay, so we're criticizing that, we're negating that, and we're saying that no, the science has nothing to do with knowledge. Science has to do with explanations. Okay, and knowledge, this is our definition: knowledge predicting to others, right, the result of an experiment without error. That's what all these people have been saying all these years. That's what we're arguing here. We're saying that knowledge is what you prove to others. Okay, and not even God, omniscient God, can predict the result of an experiment without error. If he can without error, that means the future already exists. The block universe, you know, general relativity's block universe. And you can take it all the way to the days of Augustine, St. Augustine, and you'll find that, you know, they've always had this notion of the block universe, that God sees the future, the past, the present, everything at the same time. So that's the block universe. But if that's the case, then if you believe in that, if you accept that assumption, well, that reduces you to a cartoon character. It means that you're just following footsteps that you cannot avoid because everything, the future's already been determined. Okay, so if the future's already there and then all you're doing is just walking in footsteps, and you're no different than Bugs Bunny and a cartoon character. So hopefully you don't accept that as an assumption or as a belief that the future already exists. Okay, it is there, it's already made up. Because if you do, you have no free will, meaning that, you know, whatever crime you commit, you're off the hook because, you know, you had no choice. You were forced to do it because that was the script. You just followed script, whether you knew it or not. You know, had to follow script. It was already, the cards were already thrown. So that's the problem with accepting uh, that we know. Okay, and know again means, like it says there, predicting to others the result of an experiment without error. And you cannot predict. And some people say, well, yeah, I can predict that. Yeah, let me get this out of here. I can predict that this pencil is going to fall to the floor downwards 100% of the time. And, you know, I can play a joke on you and put a couple magnets and have it stand in the air. Or maybe I don't even need that. Maybe an asteroid comes and destroys the Earth and your prediction didn't come true. Of course, I can't collect my bet. Or maybe it kills you alone and you didn't get to, you know, prove your experiment. So we cannot prove without error anything in the future. That's the issue. Okay, anything can go wrong. Usually it doesn't, or sometimes it does. Murphy's law, right? But you cannot predict everything in the future 100%. That's the point. So there is no such thing as knowledge, but that is the definition of the word knowledge that we can use consistently. And you say, well, is that true? Okay, so let's go through it. Let's first look what the Greeks said about knowledge, and I covered that the other day. Knowledge, a true judgment with an account. In other words, justified true belief. That came from the mouth, I guess, of Socrates and Plato wrote it in his book, the theorist, but he put the words, he gave credit to Socrates, okay? So, yeah, knowledge is just justified true belief. That means you're justified yourself, right, in believing it. That's all that knowledge is. And again, I call it deep belief. It's knowledge is just a deeper belief than regular belief, you could say. That's all it is. But it all dies with you, okay, according to the Greeks and according to the notions that we have today. And I'm trying to change that. I'm saying, look, we don't have any use for the word knowledge in science, but if you're going to use it, this is what you always have meant by it. It's the only way you can use it consistently, and that is predicting without error the results of an experiment. I mean, if you go to college and you're in front of the board there trying to get your degree, you are going to try to prove your knowledge to them. How do you prove it? Well, you run an experiment, and you say this is what's going to happen. I put the red liquid with a green liquid, and it turns blue. You can say something, and then you explain why, maybe. And then, so now you have an explanation. You predicted the results of the experiment that you were about to run. That's how you prove it. Can you prove the past? Well, let's find out. Let's look at some of the uses that we have of the word know or the word knowledge, and we're going to see why it's become so complex to understand the word knowledge and why people have irrational notions of what knowledge is. Let's go with the first one, okay, here. Do you know that, for example, the Pythagorean theorem, that c squared equals a squared plus b squared? Do you know that the number pi, for sure, that circumference divided by diameter is equal to 314, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? Force equals mass times acceleration, E equals mc squared. You say, well, I know this. You do you? So what did you just say? What do you mean you know it? What is the definition of knowledge if you're going to say that you know that you know this? So I need a definition of the word knowledge before you can say, I know that this is true or whatever, that I know this. Okay? Maybe you memorized it. Did you run an experiment? How do you know this? Okay? So that's the first one. Did you just memorize it in high school and you say, I know it, meaning you can recite it? So I need a definition of the word know if you're going to use it to say that you know any of these things or any other equation or whatever you find out there. Okay, that's the first one. Let's go with the second one here. Do you know history? Do you know that Alex the Great slept with Hephaestion? Do you know that Caesar crossed the Rubicon in 49 BC? Do you know that Hitler attacked France in 1940? Were you there? I mean, and even if you were there, it's worthless, because are you going to prove it to me? How are you going to prove, for example, that Neil Armstrong, right, stepped on the moon in 1969 today? How are you going to prove that? You're going to run an experiment and say, look, this is the foot of Neil Armstrong and this is how he stepped on the moon in 1969? Is that how it's done? Is that how you prove that man stepped on the moon for the first time? So you can see we're going to use the word know in different contexts here, and what I need is a definition of the word know that includes all of them. If you cannot define it with all of them, then we got a problem, because you cannot say that you know that Neil Armstrong stepped on the moon in 1969, that you know that circumference divided by diameter is pi. You can't say you know because you haven't defined the word know. I don't know what you mean when you say no. Okay, so that's going to be the issue here. Okay, here's another context, okay? Do you know that you have a head? Do you know that you cut your hand, you're bleeding, that you have two legs, and that there's a wall to your right? Do you know this? Say, yeah, I know. Well, what does it mean? How are you going to define the word know in such a way to encompass all of these different situations? That's the question before you. Okay? Let's see if we get it right. Here's another one, another context. Okay? Do you know that God exists? How about time is warped? Space-time? Time is warped? Do you know that time is warped? Or do you believe it? Do you know that a particle can be at two places at once? Do you know that black holes suck? Do you know? Do you know where you're going to? La, da, 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 da. Yeah, you got to define the word know if you're going to be using it in a scientific context, because people want to include the word knowledge, know, into science. Okay, fine. Define it in such a way that we can use it consistently in all of these contexts. Okay. If you're going to eliminate one of the contexts, you got to justify why, because, I know history. I know that Napoleon went to Waterloo in 1815, And you say, well, that's not knowledge. Okay, then why isn't it knowledge? Do we believe that? But we don't believe. We don't believe that circumference divided by diameter is pi 314. That's not a belief. That's a knowledge. And you say, well, I can apply it in technology. I can do stuff with circles and diameters and so on. Well, Socrates already killed that one 3,000 years ago. Okay, so just check the theorist, and you'll find that he already tore that notion down. Okay, so you got to read it. Okay. Okay, how about this one? Do you know that a spoon will fall when I let go of it? Do you know this? And you say, well, I do know. Here's a spoon. Okay, little spoon. We let go of it. It falls down. And it turns out that I had air pushing from below just when you threw it. And so you did not know that it was going to fall because it's standing in the air. You say, oh, you tricked me. Irrelevant. Irrelevant, because the issue was whether you knew, whether you could predict the result of that experiment without air. Okay. Do you know that the sun will rise tomorrow? Do you know that there will be an eclipse in a minute there in that situation where the moon is covering the sun? Do you know? What do you mean you know? What's the definition of knowledge? That's the question. Do you know that the plane will crash? Some things we say, well, that's going to happen. And maybe something else happens, and it doesn't happen the way you thought it was going to. Your knowledge was not complete for some reason. Okay, how about this one? Do you know Johnny? Do you know where he lives? Do you know who your boss is? Do you know your left from your right hand, right? Like I said, in other languages, like Spanish and German, they have different words for these types of knowledge. When you know Johnny, they don't use the word know. They have a different word for those, almost in every language. The only one that I know of is English that doesn't have a word for those, which is kind of, it's like acquaintance more than knowledge. Okay. But anyways, again, you got to define the word knowledge in order for us to use it in all these different contexts. Okay. Here's another knowledge. And here we're going to be talking about theories. Okay, here it is. Do you know what causes gravity? Is that the same thing as knowing that Napoleon went to Waterloo? I mean, are we talking about the same type of knowledge here? Do you know that a magnet attracts another? Is this knowledge, or are you supposed to provide a mechanism, an explanation, a physical interpretation? Do you know what electricity is? Do you know what prevents the Earth from flying out of the solar system? Okay, these are the questions that you've got to answer if you're going to define the word knowledge and include it within science. And I'm saying the only one that is applicable, and again, there's no knowledge, but the only one that would be applicable is the notion that we have where you prove to someone else your knowledge. If you're on an island all by yourself and you cut your arm, you say, well, I know I cut my arm. I see it, I feel it, I know I cut my arm. I know I have a head. I know I have two arms. I know I have two legs. You know this. But see, whatever knowledge you have yourself is just a belief. What's the difference between belief and knowledge if you're the only person in the universe? Knowledge is something you're going to show someone else. You're going to say, let me show you that I know. Because otherwise you just have a belief. And if you're going to say, look, I cut myself. I know I cut myself, but I'm on the other side of the world and I can't see you or whatever. What am I supposed to say? That you believe until you prove it to me? So again, the issue is defining the word knowledge in such a way that you can use it consistently in science, if you're going to bring that word into science, such that you can use it in all these contexts. If you reject any of the context, you have to also justify why, because that's how it's used in ordinary speech in all these contexts.